As soon as I get home from a long day on the job, I always find solace in the mall. A certain allure accompanies the hum of chatter, the aroma of freshly baked pretzels, and the glimmer of shop windows. In a nutshell, it clarifies my breathing. That afternoon, I arrived at my destination more composed and less clumsy than normal. Clearly, I had a mission. Locate the ideal present for my mom's birthday. Something special, something that would bring her the kind of smile she can't get anywhere else. These little traditions are my lifeblood. No matter how chaotic life gets, they show me that there are still aspects I can manage. I went to the little cafe sandwiched between two shops and got my regular cappuccino. As I took that first drink, the foam caressed my lip like a delicate pleasure, and I felt instantly warmer. People were rushing past me as I sat by the glass wall. I could hear youngsters laughing, saw mothers dragging their young children, and even overheard a couple arguing about their shopping bags. I felt completely at home in my own little world, yet I couldn't help but grin as I danced to the beat. It seemed like everything was falling into place just the way it should have for a little while. I made my way to the parking lot after finishing my coffee and with the present from my mom carefully wrapped in a bag. The air was warm and slightly metallic smelling, like asphalt cooling off after a hot day. I went so far as to hum a song that I had heard on the radio earlier. Everything seemed airy, nearly ideal. My breathing became labored as I rounded a corner, though. My husband's automobile was the first one I recognized, and it was only a few rows away. I had second thoughts and wondered if I was incorrect. Even though I could see that ding anywhere, I reminded myself that there are many more cars like his. As my pulse rate increased, I decelerated. Was it likely that he would be present? David had informed me that he was working long hours due to an overwhelming number of meetings. Suppressing an overwhelming wave of anxiety, I shook my head. I wished I could cling to the serenity that had washed over me moments before. The jagged edges of the gift bag pressed into my palm, nearly tripping me as I gripped it more tightly. Reasoning swung about in my head. Maybe he had merely halted abruptly. Perhaps he had vanished altogether. Still, I couldn't move a muscle at the sight of that automobile. Without knowing, I couldn't simply stroll past. It was as if the cosmos was daring me to look deeper by bringing me to this precise position at this exact moment. In spite of this, I hoped I wouldn't have to. As I stood in the center of the parking lot, I could just make out the sound of distant engines and the jingle of shopping trolleys. I felt weighed down and choked by the warmth I'd carried from my cafe break. The serenity of my ideal day was eroding as a shiver of worry ran down my spine. I had an uneasy feeling that my life was going to take a turn for the worse. As if the ground beneath me had abruptly grown shaky, I began to move carefully, with each step deliberate. As I drew nearer to the vehicle, my gaze remained fixated on it, magnifying every feature. My pulse had accelerated. It seemed unbridled and wild, as if it knew something my rational mind couldn't fathom. I pretended it wasn't serious and would make fun of myself for worrying about it too much. I sensed a gloom, nevertheless, stealing into my soul. The fluorescent lights from the mall radiated out into the parking lot, illuminating David's shiny black automobile. I halted a few rows away, just near enough to identify it as his. Quietness supplanted the gentle murmur of my singing as my throat constricted. It was almost comical how much heavier the present bag felt now in my grasp. A thoughtfully wrapped birthday present for my mom felt insignificant in the face of the impending storm within me. In the middle of my mundane day, I stood motionless, unable to move forward as the unraveling unfolded around me. Feeling conflicted over whether to back down or forward, my stomach contorted. I had a feeling that the events to come would divide my life into two distinct periods. I lingered there, my heart pounding, unsure of how accurate that sensation was. The sight of the open driver's door sent me reeling. For an instant, my mind pleaded with me to look aside, to turn and go before the reality was revealed. The person emerging, nevertheless, held my gaze. "Hi, I'm David. My spouse." The man who claimed to be too swamped with business to spare even an hour for a simple dinner with me. It became difficult for me to breathe as my chest abruptly clenched. After that she showed up. As she played with the strap of her garment, a woman slipped out of the passenger seat, her laughter barely audible. Light and carefree, as if they had shared a secret joke. Her voice echoed around the lot. It seemed as if the floor had collapsed under my feet. My stomach dropped. As if it were second nature, she drew nearer to him and gently brushed her palm on his sleeve. Very little of it could sink in. David leaned down and kissed her in a familiar, quick, and casual way before I could budge. It was as if ice were coursing through my veins. I felt a chill go down my spine. I was paralyzed with emotion, unable to utter a sound or escape the relentless onslaught. The present bag served as my protection as I sheltered behind a row of cars. There was an innate knowing in me that things would never be the same again. My pulse was racing so rapidly that I thought someone could hear it as I drew near to the ground. I was standing only a few feet away as they strolled together, laughing the whole way to the mall's exit. His relaxed posture and the way his palm lightly caressed her lower back gave the impression that he was guiding her with ease. I was more devastated by that unassuming act than by the kiss. Being intimate was the goal, not a casual affair. With shaking hands, I retrieved my phone from its case. Unlocking it sent tremors through my fingertips as the screen gleamed harshly in the dim light of the parking lot. I questioned for an instant if I truly needed confirmation of what my eyes had previously observed. However, a sudden flash of insight washed over me. Doubt had no place in this. Life or death was at stake. As a result, I raised the phone and took picture after picture, documenting each brutal aspect. It felt like a stone-carved betrayal with every camera click. Despite feeling a tightness in my chest and shortness of breath, I persisted until I had achieved my goal. It was my intention to avoid an argument. Please not at this time. Having a yelling match in a parking lot is not acceptable. I was hoping for something more long-lasting, something that could be set ablaze at the appointed hour. I made a solemn promise to myself at that very moment. Every falsehood would make him sad. My shaking hands dropped the phone as I gently rested it on my chest, as if it were my sole source of support. As he moved further away, his voice blended with hers, sounding both relaxed and inviting, and the sound of his laughter resounded somewhat. A symphony woven into the tapestry of our existence. That sound was once mine. Had been poisoned. Sharp and vicious. Every note of it sliced into me. My entire body hummed with shock as I stood there, frozen in place. With the sound of passing headlights, conversations among strangers, and the clatter of carts on the pavement, the surrounding parking lot became hazy. It was all a complete flop. The crushing weight of betrayal was all I could sense. My trust, my marriage, and my feeling of security. A single heartbeat was all it took for it to break. Upon entering the mall that afternoon, I had transformed into a completely different person. However, I did not give in. On the contrary, I straightened my back. He couldn't possibly know me if he believed I would break. Stay dry. I'm not ready just yet. Silently, I would harbor this tempest within me until I made the decision to release it. Knowing that my silence would be the sharpest weapon, I turned away, clutching the images like a secret weapon. David was already at home when I entered that evening. As if nothing had changed. He glanced up from the couch and grinned with the same effortless charm. Has it been a long day? With a calm voice and a rehearsed tone, he inquired. I kept my expression composed and feigned a little nod as I placed my mother's gift bag on the table. When I breathed in, though, it was as if a tempest had taken up residence in my chest and was pounding against my ribs. As usual, we settled down to eat. A gentle clink of glasses, plates, and cutlery. Work, meetings, and deadlines were his topics of conversation while he rehashed the same justifications he had given me for weeks. Even though I nodded and asked pertinent questions while he spoke, I could feel a new lie igniting between us with each word he said. Though I was unwinding inside, thread by thread, my hands remained steady and my smile wan. That night, I looked at him in a different light. His quick glances in response to my inquiries and the moment of silence just before he spoke were telling. It had progressed beyond mere suspicion. I matched his behavior with mine, so he had no reason to believe that I already knew, had seen, or had proof. It was confirmation heaped over confirmation. To his surprise, he had no clue how perilous my silence had become. I went through David's jacket pockets the following morning as he bathed. He had left them dangling carelessly by the entrance. I ran my fingers through a stack of receipts, bits and pieces from his purported late nights, a bar charge, and an unreceived boutique buy. He believed he had concealed a story on every slip of paper. I put them away, being very cautious not to spill a drop. Though I would appear composed later on, my heart was racing. While I was at work, the scene in the parking lot kept playing in my head like a disturbing movie. Whenever I shut my eyes, I could still see the kiss, her touch on him, and the mirth in his laughter. However, instead of letting it send me into a tailspin, I channeled it into motivation. I began to store his text alerts as they appeared on my screen, commit his justifications to memory, and amass facts about him that he was unaware of. I was quietly putting the pieces together, one by one. As usual, he was completely unaware as he kissed my cheek upon my return home. With my mask in place, I returned the smile. Still, I was already ahead of schedule on the inside. I meticulously recorded and protected in my memory every fib he ever told me. I imagined the day I would turn the script on him and let the truth win out over his memorized lines as he continued his play. The weight of my folder containing silent proof increased by the week's conclusion. In the middle, icy and indisputable, were the parking lot images. However, now they were encircled by receipts, patterns meticulously noted, and screenshots. I couldn't help but wonder if David could feel the trap that was taking shape under him every time he glanced my way across the dinner table. But no. He was too caught up in his own illusions to see past his insistence that I was only his innocent, naive wife. His regular breaths and the rise and fall of his chest next to mine kept me awake at night. I couldn't help but wonder how many times he had returned home right into my arms after leaving hers. The idea was scorching, but I refused to give in to it. On the contrary, I kept it in a fireproof container, ready to be used as fuel for the eventual destruction of everything. No longer did my quiet indicate weakness. Strategy was at play. From the outside, everyday life seemed so ordinary. There were friendly faces checking in, neighbors waving, and we seemed to be standing firm. In private, though, I kept the truth sharp and at the ready like a razor. His demise was imminent, but he was oblivious to it, totally unaware that his every move was directing him directly into my clutches. Also, I would quickly determine the best way to let him fall. My suggestion that we have a family supper brought a smile to David's face. He mistook it for an expression of my love for him and a reminder that we were the ideal couple. I nailed my role, publicly caressing his hand, getting in close, and whispering sweet nothings that brought a smile to his parents' faces. There was ice within me. Every kind deed was practiced. Every grin transformed into an unexpected weapon. Everyone from his parents and closest friends to a handful of people he greatly respected were invited. He mistook it for an ode to our solidarity and a party for the two of us. He hummed as he paced the house, oblivious to the fact that he was setting himself up for embarrassment. I took my time setting the table, wiping off the wine glasses and carefully positioning the candles. It appeared to be love from the outside. For me, it marked the beginning of the end. There was much merriment and the sound of glasses clinking the night of the supper. In the limelight, David flourished, regaling audiences with tales and basking in their adulation. Sitting next to him, I nodded and laughed while he basked. Even so, my heart rate was constant and my thoughts were uncluttered. I enjoyed the suspense since I knew what was coming. With each passing second, the inevitable moment of the mask's destruction drew nearer. I stood up after supper and subtly tapped my glass to get everyone's attention. When I cordially gestured toward the screen I had set up earlier, I stated that I thought it could be wonderful to share some recollections. The table was adorned with smiles. They were hoping for a romantic homage, reminiscence, or anniversary. David, certain that he was about to be honored, slumped into his chair with a look of utter pride on his face. The presentation started out innocuously enough. Days spent laughing and celebrating together like vacations and birthdays. A lot of people laughed, applauded, and said nice things. David, completely persuaded of my dedication, squeezed my hand as I peered over the corner of my eye. The subsurface was about to collapse under his feet, and he had no clue. My pulse rate normalized, and an eerie serenity settled over me. The screen then changed with a single click. As the photo of the parking lot came into view, gasps resounded around the room. The intimacy between David and the other woman was obvious as he pressed against her, their lips meeting. After then, there was a heavy, stifling, nearly electric stillness. The guests remained unobserved. That wasn't necessary. As I watched David's face turn pale and his pride crumble in an instant, I couldn't take my eyes off of him. As if scorched, David's hand slipped out of mine. His jaw loosened, but he remained silent. As if on edge, the visitors' gazes darted restlessly between him and the television, anticipating an explanation of some sort. When his mom's fork sank into her plate, his dad's jaw clenched. As the atmosphere became thicker, it seemed as though not even the candles could withstand it. He sat there, pallid and caught, without the charisma he usually wore. I remained silent. I'm not ready just yet. Allowing the stillness to envelop him, I let it to stretch. As time passed, it became increasingly clear that he had lost control of the story. He had moved on from this story. Yeah, I had it. He stutter-talked about a misunderstanding as he struggled to find the right words, but nobody paid attention. There was bigger-than-life, indisputable proof. The foundation of his false empire had crumbled. I was the focal point of that room as I sat motionless, serene, and collected. My breathing became regular, and my heart rate decreased. Everything was coming together just as I had planned, after all this time spent waiting. Still, I had more to do. The final, irreparable blow that would transform this shame into a real reckoning was still to come. After what felt like an eternity, I got out of my chair, feeling the pressure of all eyes on me. David was doing this when he told me he was working late, I added gently, indicating toward the screen. I maintained my composure. Actually, it was more powerful than I had anticipated, slicing through the stillness with a knife's edge. As I turned around, I noticed people's expressions change from shocked to sympathetic. I showed no fear, even though David's gaze begged me to. A carefully folded stack of documents was extracted from my backpack by me. I proceeded with a steady, measured tone, saying that I had already spoken to a lawyer. My belongings have already been relocated. As he felt the weight of public humiliation and impending doom, I slipped the divorce papers across the table and handed them to him, seeing his quivering palms. His family's approval, his greatest source of pride, was suddenly disintegrating before his eyes. Everyone around him was frozen in shock. His parents let out gasps, his dad shifted awkwardly, and his pals sat quietly. David began to speak, but I interrupted him with a look that spoke everything. This was not an argument. It was not even a discussion. I wanted him to feel the full weight of the shame he had so recklessly brought upon himself, so I handed down this verdict. My voice was now lower but no less forceful as I turned back to face the visitors. With my eyes darting across the table, I spoke up and demanded that everyone hear the truth. He pretended to be the faithful spouse for months while staring me down in the eyes. Yet this. I gestured at the screen's motionless image. Behold, this is his true nature. A low-level muttering resounded across the space, as if respect had suddenly evaporated. Tears were gathering in David's mother's eyes as she covered her mouth. I thought the silence would be broken by the intensity of his father's disappointment as he glanced at him. In a last-ditch effort to cover up our nakedness, David frantically reached across the table and whispered my name to me. Before he could touch me, I withdrew my hand, making my refusal clear without saying a word. That was the last move. I stood up straighter, determined not to be swept away by the emotion. No longer was this about fury. Instead, it was about asserting my identity in the clearest, most brilliant way possible. Now that I had subtly carried out his deceit and pieced together the evidence, I was finally free of him. Not only were there legal documents on the table, but there were more. Those were the words I promised. Living in his shadow was enough for me. Gathering my belongings, I made sure that every single person in the room kept their gaze fixed on me. The only unadulterated part of the day was carrying my mother's present bag on my shoulder. It was the only detail. For the last time, I glanced over at David. In front of those whose praise he valued most, he appeared pale and humiliated. That was the irreparable wound, I knew. I kept my emotions in check and refused to let him see how vulnerable I was. Rather, I went over to the door with my head held high. My stride was slow and methodical, leading me away from the deceit and toward liberation. From behind me, I could make out the sound of increasing voices, the rustle of chairs, and the astonished astonishment filling the room. No turning back for me. On one occasion only. It was as if I were inhaling deeply for the first time in months when I went out into the chilly night air. A heavier, more sturdy object shifted its weight off my chest. Fix it. David would always be known as the liar who was betrayed by his own family, rather than as a spouse or the guy he purported to be. And I would go down in history as the lady who would not stand for deceit any longer.